In this part of the Razorback series, we're going to take a look at the FLIR instrumentation on the front of the bike. So that's this thing here that everybody thinks is a nose or a headlight or something. It's actually one of these sensor arrays. So it allows the machine to see in the dark. Let's take a look at some of the reference images I've found online. This one here seems to be mounted under some sort of a vehicle, maybe a helicopter. And this one here is sort of a product shot, showing it off really nicely. And let's just start by starting to punch a couple of holes in that sphere up front and seeing what we can make it look like. So we have our sphere here and we want to add a couple holes. So the best way to do that might be a Boolean operation. So I'm just going to go to the side view and create a cylinder. Just going to scale this cylinder down, and if we go back to our object view, our object manager that is, we can change it to the z-axis, give it maybe 12 rotation segments, and scale it down a little bit. There's probably going to be one that's quite large. I'm just going to control drag the duplicate, and there's going to be one that's a fair bit smaller. So we can then sort of move them both closer to the center, just like that. Now I'm going to hide this for a second, because before we do that we want to create that sort of strip that runs between them. So if I go back to the picture viewer, you can see that it's sort of mounted on a central, well actually no, that's just the way the sphere is on this one. Our sphere would already be like that. Maybe we just flatten out the sides a little bit so it doesn't look so symmetrical. Well, not symmetrical, round is the word I was looking for, so it doesn't look so round. Before we do that, I'm just going to cut that and paste it up here at the top of our document. And probably want more segments to work with. Something like 30. That should be okay. So we have our 30 segments. And now we can press C to convert it to an editable object. Let's go up to the top view, and what I'd like to do is scale the sides of this object down while maintaining the curve at the center. So I think the easiest way to do that would be with a rectangular selection. And let's just select the first 3 rows here, and what we can do is just scale it down like that. And then we can select just the first 3 rows on this side, scale it down to 50%. Repeat the process on this side, scale it down to 50% as well. The snapping allows us to do that quite easily. And then we can scale it down a little bit more. So what we're left with is more of an egg shape than a perfect sphere, and hopefully that'll help sell the effect. Now, because we've done this, we may need to thicken the frame, the housing that holds it in place. So let's see how that would work. We just need to select these polygons right there. Go to the top view perhaps. No, top view isn't much worth to us. So we can just scale it down and then select just the ones in the center. Just go to wireframe mode. You can kind of see what I'm doing. And then we can scale it down a little bit more until it touches the sides. And then we can go to edge mode to select just the edge in the center. And we can scale that down too. So what we're left with is a less spherical looking shape and a more intentionally warped shape. In addition, perhaps we can select these 2 loops of edges right here just to give some arbitrary detail. So now that we have those selected, we can scale it up on the XY a little bit and then bevel the edge. So it looks like it's intentionally shaped that way. It's not a mistake. It's supposed to look like that. And I'm seeing here that this frame could probably come out a little bit more, cover the sides, kind of like that. We may need to readjust it. No, I think that looks okay. So now this is beginning to look more like an instrument and less like a nose or a headlight. And of course, we would spin it on both of its axes. It'd be pretty cool. So now we have this sphere that's less of a sphere. And we can turn these cylinders back on and decide exactly where they go. So now we see the edge with this hard crease. We know we can't cross that point. And we can sort of say, okay, let's just go with the symmetry, the asymmetry that we've been dealing with this whole time, and just sort of exaggerate that a bit. I'm going to go to the side view and just make sure my offsets aren't too much. I want it to still be roughly near the center. And just tweaking it until it looks okay. And I think that's about good. Now we can do 2 units or 3. This one is a hole and then 2 recess units. I like how that looks, so let's do it that way. So we just replicate this a 3rd time and make it much smaller for the hole. The laser, it looks like there's a range finding laser or something in there. Cool. So now we have our punches that we want to punch the holes with. So we can select these 3 cylinders and group them. Just Alt-G. I'm not sure if that's the default shortcut, but it's what I have here. Alt-G, Shift-G to group and ungroup. So we have our group here, and then we have our sphere. So we can now create a Boolean object, put our sphere in it, and then place this null with our group of other objects in it. And we can sort of see that we have these recesses. Now the edges around here look kind of messy. We should probably clean that up. But more importantly, we should tweak the number of edges each cylinder has. Right now they all have the same amount, and that may not work ideally for us. We can also tweak the position so it creates a friendlier Boolean. For instance, if we did it here along the edge, we're unnecessarily disrupting that edge. But if we moved it up a little bit, well, we can have it maintain its shape in a circle. Well, sorry, in a polygon, in a square. So the damage this Boolean is about to do has been limited. We can also say, okay, this is a really small circle. We probably don't need that many edges on it, but we do want maybe 10. And let's make sure it's an even number. An even number should subdivide nicely into this square that it's housed in. So we can just sort of leave it right there. And see, okay, we'll come back to that. Now, an alternative is you intentionally place it on an axis like this. What that allows you to do is spread the extra edges around a larger surface. So if we did it that way, we'd probably want to make sure that there is a point at each intersection. So we'd probably just tweak it. I think I like this approach better for this particular example. So let's just tweak it so, as you can see, there's sort of a point at each edge there. And yeah, we'll see how that works. So I'm just going to do some counting real quick. So it looks like we'd have 2 faces there, 3 here, 2 down there as well. So these 3 faces are not going to subdivide nicely there. So we may actually want to change the number of edges the cylinder has from 10 to maybe 12. Let's see how 12 works. So if we put a point on each edge with 12, no, that's not great either. Maybe 8? 8 looks like it just might be too low resolution. I mean, it would divide rather nicely. So maybe we double 8 and just go for 16. So that way we can line up the points at the edge, and you know, we have a better idea of what we're going to be dealing with. I know that 16 doesn't sit right with me. Let's just go back to 10. I'm going to take my chances with that. If I get it wrong, we can always do it over. Okay, so now let's move on to this other cylinder down here, and same sort of thing. Let's make sure that it sits in a relatively convenient spot for us to work on it. That looks pretty good. It looks like it has a decent amount of edges, so I'm just going to leave that at 12. And then we have the largest cylinder, and again you see how it just breaks the edge here. That's probably not ideal, so we can move it so that it's contained in this grid here that we're looking at. And these are, you know, I have another screencast where I talk about Boolean tips in Cinema 4D. These are some of the really simple things that you can do to make sure your Boolean doesn't mess up your geometry. You know, keep it away from this edge. It's nice to have a nice clean edge. You know, if you see that it's just about to intersect an area, make it either fully intersect that area or not intersect at all. These are just really simple tips that you can employ to sort of help keep your geometry clean. So there we go, and we can just say our Boolean create single object, hide new edges, and that should be it. Or maybe we don't hide the new edges. We can do that manually. So we press C to convert to editable object, and we can see now we have a single object right here. So we do have a lot of messy geometry left behind. Let's go back, undo until this is still editable, and we can say hide new edges. How about that? So now we press C. So we have this object again, and we are going to have some extra points as indicated by these n-gons, some extra stuff to clean up, but I'm just going to go really quickly and start cleaning this stuff up. So I'm just going to use the weld tool and the selection tool, and wherever I see extra geometry, I'm just going to condense it so it's not extra anymore. So right there, just going to go and make sure that these are all, so wherever I see like an n-gon at a strange angle right next to a line that I know is from the cylinder, I'll use the line that was from the cylinder, because we know that that line has a uniform shape and its geometry is more correct, like that. And you know, we can just quickly move through these and say, okay, I'm just gonna talk a little bit less right now, because that way I'll work more quickly. There's actually 2 points there, but they're really close together. You gotta watch out for stuff like that. The n-gon lines can be a telltale, sort of let you know where you have that kind of trouble before it becomes problematic. So there we go. I'm not going to be a perfectionist about quadrangles and stuff, because this project is much more of a concept piece. So I don't want to get sidetracked with that sort of stuff. But what we can do is we can select both of these groups of polygons here and scale them down so that they're on the same plane, so they seem more connected. We don't have to do it this way, but I just thought maybe that would be cool. It may look good, it may not. Now you see we have some fuzzy sort of smudging here, and that's because our Phong tag doesn't have an aggressive enough angle. So if we reduce this to 60 degrees, or maybe even lower, like 45, there we go. You see it cleans it right up. We won't need that after we do our bevel to smooth out the edges, but I think it was worth mentioning. So now that we have all this nice, relatively clean geometry, we can just select some edge loops and do some bevels. So I'm just going to select that first edge loop and use my bevel tool just to do a simple bevel right there. And then you can see that the issue comes back because now it's too aggressive. So I'm actually going to change the Phong tag back to 80 so that it all gets smoothed, and we can deal with the softness in another way. So I'm going to select this edges here, and I can choose my bevel tool and I can just hit apply and it does the same bevel that it just did. That way we know that all of our bevels are the same size. There we go. Now we're getting all these fuzzy parts around the edges, but we can fix that. What we essentially need to do is add an extra loop of edges around the edge. And the easiest way to do that is with the knife tool. So I'm just going to grab the knife tool and say visible elements only. And we can just start adding some cuts to make this a little bit easier. So that's odd. Something seems to be problematic here. Let me make sure all of the edges are being shown. There we go. I guess there was some sort of a hidden edge causing some issues. Okay, so we can start cutting this up like that, and then we simply bring our knife tool and add an extra ring, an extra loop of edges right around the side. So this last point here was really close, so I can just slide it out. And what we have is more of a soft, believable transition. So I'm just going to repeat that process for these other two. Now notice that I created these edges first. So where we have an opportunity to create an edge like that, I did. Now, the reason I did that is because it makes it a lot simpler to create these edges if you have edges radiating outward from the opening at first. So for instance, I could not go from here to here because I would cut through. And we don't want to do that, so I'd instead have to go up there and then create another cut like that. That just gets messy. The easier way to do it is just complete this n-gon. And the reason I don't just say, oh, convert all the n-gons is because sometimes I want to maybe complete it by going that way instead. But you just complete the n-gons so that you actually have the geometry to flow along. You know, all these n-gons actually look pretty good. Now here, when I did the bevel, it actually created a triangle. This is a really good opportunity to just collapse it. I just use the weld tool and get rid of it. There's probably one or two more of them here, and they usually happen when you do a bevel. And there we go. And so this is a good example of where I actually want this line to go the other way, not the way Cinema 4D tried to triangulate it. And so, you know, this is another good example. I can actually bring it down here and then follow it that way instead. That actually creates better geometry than if I were to just use what Cinema 4D gave me here. So it looks like I actually have a quad here, so I'm going to melt this edge and then slide this around a little bit, and that gives more of a natural path there. Although it's probably flat, I need to pull it out a little bit so it still carries the curve. So you just look at it from a few different angles and make sure it looks nice and curved. Nice and smooth. Yeah, that looks fine. So, just before we finish up, we just need to add that extra cut with the knife. So, just gonna run around the edge. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. All we're doing is creating sort of a barrier so that the smooth shading doesn't go further than it should. Now as we go around with this barrier, we're going to start to see some spots that we could probably enhance. For instance, I don't like that we were creating more triangles there, so we can probably just collapse that And do the same thing there and here. And there's another one right here. And some of them are kind of off. So this one here should be moved around a little bit like that. And what you can do is you can use the slide tool. It's the tool that I'm using right now, and you can just slide it along parallel and then pull it out. And go parallel again. So you can actually do that. The reason I do it that way is because then you don't move it along the wrong axis accidentally. If you use the slide tool, it pretty much always stays on the surface, which is where you want that point. You don't want it to deviate from laying flat on the surface, especially since its whole purpose in life is to be a surface barrier so that the smoothing doesn't go too far. So that looks pretty good. We just have to do it on this one last piece, and then we'll probably be pretty close to done. So in this case, I'm actually going to make the call. I'm going to bridge these two. So that way I get quads here, and I get a quad there as well. So everybody wins. The only thing I would need to do is make sure that this follows the curve, because I did cut a straight line to make an extra point. So now it kind of follows the curve. And we can see we have a triangle up here that we forgot about. So we can just sort of move it out. And some of these are aligned kind of strangely, probably from when we were collapsing triangles. Alright, looks good. So for this one, these triangulated spots look okay to me. So I'm actually just going to select all of the n-gons around the edge, except that one. And I'm actually just going to say UE, which converts them to polygons, quadrangles, and triangles. So there we go. So now I can make my last manual cut. It is kind of a pain to have to make this cut manually, but I think the results are much more pleasant to deal with. So you see there I went right through a triangle. It's because I knew I'd be getting rid of it. I think there's another spot around the edge here where I'll do the same thing. Yeah, right there. So I'm actually just going to overshoot it a bunch to keep that line parallel. And then I'm actually going to come from this side. Being kind of messy is because I want to keep those lines parallel. So we just keep going around the edge. It's getting kind of hard to see with the lighting at this angle. So once we go around, I'm just going to cut right through. And then just for the final step, I'm going to clean it up slightly. For instance, this triangle needs to go away. And you know, there's a triangle there, but I think it's okay. I just have to make these more parallel, or perpendicular as it were. So we can just weld those together. They all sort of came together in a neat little spot. I'm wondering if these triangles shouldn't be taken away in favor of a quad. Maybe not. It looks like they had more purpose as a triangle because they helped continue the shape. So I'm just going to slide this edge over a little bit just to give a bit of a bulge. And yeah, it looks pretty good. I think I'm happy with how this is coming out. And we're just about coming up on 25 minutes of recording, so this is probably a decent place to stop. But hey, look at that. Let me turn off lines, and it's actually a pretty good looking cut into that sphere. I'm really happy with that. So let's look at our reference material one more time. It looks like one of the lenses is flat, and the other one sort of bulges, and there's also some extra details inside here, so we can make some of those quickly. I think we have a few minutes. So what we can do is select these faces and these faces, and let's bring them out. So this guy we don't want to bring out any further than that, but this guy down here we can actually bring him up a little bit more. So I have them both right to where there's just that little lip, and there's just that little lip. So now I can select both groups of faces, and we can start to do some fancy extrusion. So the first thing I'll do is extrude. So we're just going to extrude up a little bit. Now notice it says create caps. We don't want that. We don't want to create any caps. And then we want to do a normal scale just to pull them in a little bit. And then we want to do an extrude inner to get that red lip that you see in the reference material. And then extrude, and I'm going to extrude downwards this time like that. Cool. Alright, so once I've done that, we established that the big one was sort of flat. It stayed flat and shiny. But this one down here had a bit of a bulge. So the easiest way to do that is an extrude inner, and then just pull it forward a little bit. So you get that lens shape. And we can even grab the point at the center and move it up a little bit too. We can then select the edges along that sort of gasket, red sort of rubber gasket looking part right there. And we can do a bevel on it. So just grab my bevel tool and just do a really simple bevel there, just so it turns it from 2 to 4 edges. And we have something that now looks a lot more like a surveillance item with a few different instruments on it. And so we can take this sphere, it still has its original origin, so we can rotate it like that. And as long as it's a child of the bracket, no, wrong bracket, this is still at its point in the hierarchy, so we can actually cut this object, select this guy, go to where he is, and paste it. So we have our FLIR, our cylinder. Let's rename the cylinder base, and let's call this turret. So we can take our base and rotate the base, and we can have this creepy robotic eye sort of look over at you. And it could even sort of be sweeping side to side as it's driving down the highway. So that's pretty cool. I think that's what I wanted when we originally started to model this. That's definitely the kind of look I was going for. You know, we could continue by selecting that edge there and sort of beveling it. Giving it that nice smooth appearance. But I don't think I'm ready to bevel that yet. Maybe we want to add some more detail, and I'm not ready to let go of it just yet. So I think that's it for this installment, but at least we got that thing on the front that's not a headlight or a nose looking less like a headlight or a nose, hopefully. So until next time, see ya. Oh, I also wanted to mention I made the blades a little bit longer, and I made the whip antenna a little bit shorter. So if you were asking yourself about that, no, it's not just you. I actually modified those. So yeah, until next time, thanks for watching and have a good one.